Good morning and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Friday. I hope this is finding you really well and cheerful, and it's good to see you. It really is good, and I hope you're looking forward to a good day. Just to remind you, this being Friday, that we cannot meet physically in church at the moment, but we are streaming services online for you. On Saturday evening there's a meditation at 5:30, Sunday morning 10 o'clock service, there'll be an evening song at 5:30, and of course St Anne's at 11:45. We'd love it, wherever you may be, if you could join us for worship, that'd be fantastic. Right, my friends, we are over halfway through our adventure through the book of Revelation. It's a challenge, but we're getting there. Just a quick recap so far. Chapter 1, more the introduction, John and Patmos and so on. Chapters 2 and 3, we have letters to 7 churches in Western Turkey. Chapter 4, vision of God of his creation. Chapter 5, we have the scroll with Jesus being allowed to open it. Chapter 6 and 7, we have the seals being opened, therefore the scroll being opened. Chapters 8 to 11, we have 7 trumpets being blown. And at the last, the 7th trumpet, we have God's main event, God's main plan, the birth of this child in chapter 12, which was yesterday. Now, it being God's main rescue plan, the opposition is not too happy about it. And that's what we find out today in chapter 13, what we're up against. So, as I always say, fasten seatbelts, hard hats on. Revelation chapter 13, here goes. Then the dragon took his stand on the sand of the seashore, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea, and on its horns were 10 diadems, on its head were blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth, and the dragon gave its power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have received a death blow, but its mortal wound had been healed. In amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. They worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who can fight against it?" The beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. It was given authority over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all the inhabitants of the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slaughtered. Let anyone who has an ear listen. If you are to be taken captive, into captivity you will go. If you kill with the sword you will be killed. You must be killed. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast that rose out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its behalf, and makes the earth and the inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound had been healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in the sight of all. And by the signs that it is allowed to perform on behalf of the beast, it deceives the inhabitants of the earth, telling them to make an image of the beast that had been wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so the image of the beast could even speak and cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell who does not have the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it's the number of a person. Its number is 666. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, confession time before we start. This chapter always makes me feel ever so slightly uncomfortable because I was actually born on the 6th month of 66. 666 is not a good birthday to have in my line of work, as we've discovered this morning, especially when you find out that my middle name is Nick as well. I did challenge my mother about this the other day. Apparently I came out when I was ready to come out, and they just liked Nick because it was a nice name. So for that reason, until I start seeing numbers on my forehead, I should take it that isn't me. Anyway, confession out the way, I just thought I'd share that one with you as a bit of a chuckle for this morning. So what do we have here? We have this beast, and we have the dragon, who is Satan, who is basically the power behind this beast which appears on the earth. I suppose, though, given that you don't think that the Vicar of Penn is the beast in Revelation, I hope you're not. I can think of a few people that probably do think it is, but that's another story for another day. What actually is the beast? Who is the beast in Revelation? Well, over the years, there have been many, many suggestions. A whole generation of people, evangelical Christians in the 70s and 80s, were told to believe that the European Community was the beast. Other suggestions have been the World Council of Churches and various other things. Personally, I can't go with these. The reason being that I just have all the evil regimes that have been between Revelation and now. I can't imagine John sitting down with the Philadelphians and saying, actually, if you want to find out who the beast really is, if you go forward about 2,000 years, go past all the other regimes, and you get to this European... I can't go with it. It just seems to be a bit far-fetched. I go back to Revelation, I think, was written by a real guy to a real church in real time. And I think to the people who received this, it would have been quite clear that the book of the beast in Revelation is clearly the Roman Empire. As I understand it, the 10 horns or the 10 heads could be the 10 emperors. And in lots of ways, it was like it. I gather that Nero, because one of the emperors who particularly persecuted the Christians, I believe he stabbed himself in the neck. And there was some thought that he might have come alive again, and somebody else put themselves forward as being another Nero and was taken seriously by another country for quite a few years. So it could well be the beast with the wounded heel, the healed head and so on. So I do believe that here, that John here means the beast, the real original beast of Revelation, to be the Roman Empire. And I think that's what it's really about. And I think if you put it like that, it does make a great deal of sense. But the trouble with that is, that's a bit of a cop-out for us, isn't it? Because that means we can say, well, the beast went a long time ago. What's it got to do with us? Because I suppose I want to ask the question, what could be a beast today? Where did the Roman Empire go wrong? What could be a beast today? Well, I come back to that number, that 666. What could it mean? Well, there have been various suggestions and ciphers and things. But I think it goes like this. 7 is a perfect number. 6 is nearly 7, but it's not quite. 6 almost, it wants to be 7, but it isn't 7. And I think that is the key. Because this coming weekend is the feast of what we call Christ the King. And it reminds us that Jesus Christ is the King. And I suppose I believe that where the Roman Empire went wrong is because, to coin an old phrase, I'm probably quoting incorrectly, power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. They got so power crazed, they set themselves up as God. The emperors used to call themselves God. Nero, who couldn't forget Peter Ustinov in Quo Vadis, O your divinity, was called a divinity, because they set themselves up as God. And they made it so they could be supremely powerful. So you could, as it says towards the end of the chapter, that you couldn't buy or sell without having the mark on your head or your wrist. Okay, they made it so they were supreme authority. And I believe that anything that puts itself in the place of God is a potential to be used by Satan, a potential beast. Because Christ is king, God is king, and anything that puts itself in God's place is a usurper, is a potential beast, could potentially be used by Satan. And it can be all sorts of things. It could be a crazy government, so it could be something like Kim Jong-un. But it could be all sorts of other things. It could be a controlling and abusive partner. It could be an all-consuming interest. It could be all sorts of things. But anything that puts itself in the place where only God should be, I believe, is a potential beast. 6 is nearly 7. 6 looks like 7. 6 wants to be 7, but it isn't 7. And I think the message we need to get from this today is to make sure that we worship God, to put God first, that we should worship only him because he alone is God. To remember, as we said this weekend, Christ is king. Jesus will go on later in the chapter, in the book, to call himself the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And let's make sure that we do not worship or put anything else in the place where only God could be. God is king, and we should worship him and put him first. And I think that's what the message is today. The original beast, the original 666, I believe, was the Roman Empire. But the message for us is to make sure that we put God in God's rightful place. It's right to appreciate other things. It's right to serve other things. But the message is we should worship and put God first. God is king, and nothing should be in his place. And even rulers should remember that God comes first, that they may be king, but Jesus Christ is the King of Kings. And that's what I think this chapter is about, to make sure we put God in his rightful place. Phew, God bless you. Have a lovely day. And I'm just glad to know the 666 wasn't